Okay, I want to call to order the special meeting of the Board of Education for Murphysboro Community Unit School District 186. And Nancy, would you please call the roll?
Mr. Beavers?
Here.
Dr. Corley?
Here.
Mrs. Dorr absent. Mr. Green?
Here.
Mrs. James absent. Mrs. Miller? Here. Mr. Rungy?
Here. Okay, next item of business is the approval of the agenda. Are there any changes, Mr. Grody?
No, sir.
Okay, I will entertain a motion to accept the agenda as printed.
So moved.
Second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. I don't have...
Just done that.
All right, next item of business is the recognition of the audience. There's usually an item that I have to read that says you have 5 minutes if you want to say something. I don't have it tonight, and I do not have it memorized. So, are there any public or employee concerns? No one? Janet?
No.
Okay.
I was going to, but I'm not.
Okay. If there are none, we just want to thank you for coming. And we just really have one item of business. It's under old business. It is the early payoff of existing IMRF early retirement incentive liability. And Mrs. Bush, I will turn it over to you.
Yes. We've been talking about for several months now the possibility of offering IMRF early retirement incentive. And the last incentive that we offered was in 2011. And board approved that resolution to offer that early retirement program. I believe it was March of 2011 at the regular board meeting, with a 5-year amortization period. That amortization, or that liability, has been amortized by IMRF over a 10-year period. So we do still have an existing liability, and it would be my recommendation, in order to save interest costs over the next 5 years, if we pay that liability off now, and that liability is $630,806, and the change in these dollars, and I believe I sent you that revised information for the district, $367,003, and then Tri-County's liability, because they're with us with their IMRF, $263,803 would be that liability. So if the board did decide to pay that liability off now, then Tri-County would pay their part. Administrative district to Tri-County, then our board makes that decision, and they're part of that decision. The saving in interest by paying off that liability early is a total of $161,038, which our part of that, the district's part, would be $93,692. And Tri-County would be paying Tri-County's savings would be $67,346. So a significant amount. And I know, the question has been, do we have the funds to do that? If we had, the amortization period would have been 5 years, as the board intended in 2011, we wouldn't have the fund balances that we have now. We would have already spent that money. So that money is sitting in, we have money in IMRF, in education fund, that could cover those funds to pay that liability. And of course, with IMRF, in order to offer a future early retirement incentive, any liabilities have to be paid off prior to that. So if the board did not approve the early payoff of this liability, then we wouldn't be able to offer that until that's paid off, which could be 5 more years, or 2023. So it would be administration's recommendation to pay that liability off early at a great savings, to be able to then make a decision at a later date to offer that program again. And looking at paying those funds through the IMRF fund, $150,000 out of that, with the remaining $217,003 out of the education fund. And as part of the longer amortization period, our IMRF rate that we're charged on our non-certified salaries has been a lot lower than it would have been. So during those financially difficult years that we had, where we weren't sure if funding was going to come, where thinking we're gonna have to borrow money to make our payroll last summer. It actually helped us a little bit that we hadn't paid out all that money because we had more money in our fund balances due to that. So there is a little bit of light at the end of the tunnel due to that. If the board does approve the early payoff, then it would be then I would be looking at revising our budget for this fiscal year to show these payments in our budget.
Okay. Questions from the board?
Would it be one lump sum, or did you say over a year you can make payments?
What's that on the liability?
Mm.
Now, one lump.
What else can that money go to? Is that an account just for that?
In
or-
IMRF, anything that's in the IMRF fund can only be spent on those benefits. But of course, in the education fund, anything. But what happened since we had a lower IMRF rate, and so funds that we would levy property taxes, that's where most of our dollars for IMRF come from, the property tax, specific property tax levy for IMRF. So we had a lower rate over that period of time, so funds that we would have needed to push into there remained in the education fund, because that's something we try to do is maximize the education fund each year.
Good.
And the ed fund would be taking a hit of not quite $500,000 if we're paying out tri-counties also? Because we'll be paying that up front for them.
Well, but they'll be paying us back as
But
soon
over
as
3 years.
No,
No.
no.
They're gonna pay us back to 204.
We're asking them to pay us
306.
$263,803.
They pay that immediately?
Yeah.
Mrs. Bush asked me about that
Yeah.
when that first came out, whether or not we should offer a payment or a lump sum, and I told her I did not think the board would go for a payment plan, that the board would want a lump sum from
Right.
Tri-County.
So I kind of revised my recommendation
So
on
they
that.
basically have to do what we tell them.
And
We've
they
talked
have
to
the,
Tri-County, and they have money in their Medicaid account, so they
Yeah.
have to.
Let me ask, because I know we've talked about this though. I asked what's their opinion on this, and what I hear is they're not happy, they're not excited
Well,
about this, so.
well, I mean, and no
Whether
one
they
would be.
can or can't, I guess I still wanna know their opinion, because this is their money too.
We haven't had board meetings on Wednesday, so.
Talked to Jan Piercy today, and she said, well, it is what it is. We're gonna save the interest as well. It's not what we would have liked, but
But they're like we are. They would have already spent some of the money in their fund balances had it been amortized. So, they also experienced a lower IMRF rate.
So how many years have we been paying on this? Because you said 5 years left, so we've been paying for 5 years?
Yeah.
So it happened in 2011, didn't start paying until,
13.
okay. What was the interest difference between the 5 and the 10-year amortizations?
I didn't bring that number.
I aimed to ask you that the other day and
Yeah.
I forgot.
Doesn't that change though?
Every year?
Yeah,
Based upon,
It
based
does
upon,
change every
rate?
year because it's
Based
based
on
on,
investments or
it
something.
isn't based on
Yeah.
investment. So the rate every year, the regular rate, the ERI rate is based on how well the money that we have does and what so that's why it's kind of hard to estimate interest in
So it's a
future
floating
interest.
rate.
It is a floating rate. We never have the exact same rate because even when we're doing a 5 and 5 in the past, our rate is never the same for that ERI period because it's based on investments as
there-
well as what the need is for
Is there
that.
ever a ballpark, or is it really crazy?
It's not really crazy year to year unless 2008. Some of those years we get hit maybe a little bit harder. Do you have a little bit of advance notice?
I assume it's tied probably to a T-bond
Yeah,
type of book.
I'm not sure about that. We get our rates enough ahead of time that they don't just throw them at us at the last minute, and that's why if we open a window for ERI, then we have until the end of the calendar year. We've talked about setting a June 30th window if we offer this again, and that's what we did in 2011, June 30th. 2011 to 2012, and then we didn't actually start paying anything on that liability until 2013.
So the difference between paying them in a 5 year, having to set them in a 5 year and paying a 5 year would be the amount of interest accrued on the amount that we didn't pay over that 5 years.
Right, and you have additional interest, but you also have that much lower rate that we were paying, on our, on the IMRF ERI because of that. I mean, I kind of crunched those numbers the best I could, trying to pull out, okay, we need this much more of a liability, and what was the rate, and what would how much more would we need on that payroll, you know, to come up with that difference. And we really, I mean, it was really close to a break even, which kind of surprised me that it would fall that way.
I know this is you've only done 2 of these. Have they ever offered a fixed rate, or they always have a floating rate?
It's a floating rate because we are a self-funded. Everything comes from employer and employee, so no money from the state, and the employees have a fixed rate of 4.5%. So everything to fund appropriately at 100% has to come through the employer.
Yeah, just curious.
So they don't offer that for that very reason. And it just depends on what your retirement experience is through the regular retirements, and what's necessary to be set aside for each one.
So we would save 87, our district. 93.
93.
Okay.
93.
But that's if
692.
all 32 go.
No,
No,
this is
just
period.
for this.
This has
No,
nothing to
this
do
is
with
Just the interest.
This has nothing
saving
to do,
on the interest
yeah,
alone.
this
Okay.
is
Yeah,
the last ERI liability, paying that off. And the thing for me is, if we have the funds available now, paying that interest, could go for a lot of, paying that $93,000 over 5 years could pay for a lot of other things.
Well, and here's my concern though. I don't really trust our government. It's an election year. They can make all the promises they want about the evidence-based funding coming through.
Mm-hmm.
It's an election year. They're going to say that. I mean, they could settle it tomorrow. They could settle it a year from now.
Right.
I'm not comfortable, and I know I'm going to make a lot of enemies right now, but I'm not comfortable depleting ed funds to that degree. It just makes me too nervous. There's just things coming up, and I don't know.
How many days, the 192,843 out of the ed fund, how many days is that, I mean, in practical terms, how many days is that worth of school?
Like 2 or 3 months.
No, 2 or 3 days.
Our payroll,
Payroll's $1 million a month.
yeah, a little over $1 million every month
So it's
for payroll.
about 20 working days a
20,
month.
yeah.
So yeah, it's 3.5 days. I guess the savings and the difference between the 5 and the 10 year and the interest savings is hard in my mind to fathom. Yeah, I mean the 93,000 in savings isn't necessarily savings based off the
Moving
10 year,
forward,
based
right.
off the 10 year.
Exactly.
Original plan of 5 year, it's
Right.
not. But at this point, it's those are the cards we're dealt. We got to fix a problem. That,
Right.
You know.
Stop any future bleeding.
Other questions?
Are there any implications on paying 150 out of the IMRF fund that could not hurt us in the future?
No, we have the our levy each year, and we have additional funds that go into their corporate personal property taxes. So I always budget more than enough in property taxes to cover each year's liability plus a little bit more. So, and really, we're not supposed to keep a large amount on hand of IMRF funds. IMRF tort, those are as needed levies. So the idea is you only levy what you really need, and not stockpile big balances.
Where's the money come from that goes into IMRF?
Property tax levy.
Okay, that's part of it.
And so we get the this amount of money each year. There's a finite amount outside of our debt service that we get, and part of that goes in, as much as we need goes into IMRF, and each year when I do our property tax levy, I try to maximize and put everything else in the ed fund. So I really try to keep what we levy down in IMRF and in tort, those as needed funds, so we don't carry those balances, and the money can be spent on teachers and non-certified employees' salaries and textbooks and all the things we need.
Okay, a couple other questions. Do we have any other loans? Because every loan we have, if we pay them off now, we save interest. This isn't the only one. Are there any other loans we could pay off from other funds?
The only thing we have, leases that we do, And those leases, come from a levy. We specifically levy for that lease levy. And we, keep that, have an amount in that fund, and then we have, I think we have three or four existing leases. We've
Is
done
there a
one,
balance in
done
that
one
fund
every
to
year.
pay those off?
But we couldn't use that. That's specifically for lease levy through the operations and maintenance fund. So that's a restricted levy for that.
And so the last time we did this, there were 35 eligible the last time, and 22 went.
Right.
So this time, there's 32 eligible, but of those, 19 can go anyway next year, right?
19, they probably would be, could be, because they have to have 20 years.
Okay.
So they might be eligible anyway.
Okay.
This would allow those employees to be able to retire without a penalty, a reduced pension.
Other questions? Okay, so the recommendation from administration is to pay off the existing liability on the existing early retirement incentive out of the two funds, which will net a savings interest-wise of $93,000. That's the recommendation from
Yes.
administration.
The
All right.
total savings will be 161. Tri-County will,
Included in that recommendation is telling Tri-County that they are gonna pay a lump sum as well.
yes.
Got you. All right, you've heard recommendation from administration. I will entertain a motion to approve.
So,
In a second,
second,
Nancy?
Mr. Beavers?
Yes.
Dr. Corley?
yes.
Mrs. Dorr absent, Mr. Green?
Yes.
Mrs. Jennings absent, Mrs. Miller?
No.
And Mr. Rungy?
Yes, motion carries. Next item of business is adjournment. And I will, okay, we have a motion, do I have a second? Second. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you all for coming.